Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fables with Aesop. Today's fireside tale is The Dream Hunters, from the Sandman anthology, written by Neil Gaiman. Chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 3. Far to the south and the west, in his house in Kyoto, the master of yin-yang, the onmyoji, burned a lamp at a small table, upon which he had placed a square of painted silk, and upon it a lacquer chest and a black wooden key. Arranged according to the 5 cardinal points of the compass were 5 small porcelain plates, upon 3 of which were powdered matter, upon 1 of which was a bead of liquid, and upon the last plate there was nothing at all. The onmyoji was a rich man. He was a high official in the Bureau of Divination, and many sought his advice and his favors. The governors of many provinces were grateful to him, and believed that his influence and his fortune-telling had given them their fortunes or their high positions. He had the ear of the chancellor, and of the ministers of the right and the left, but he was not a happy man. He had a wife who lived in the northern wing of his house, who ran his household judiciously and efficiently, and who treated him in every way as a wife should treat a husband. He had a concubine who was barely 17, and who was very beautiful. Her skin was as pale as the palest plum blossom. Her lips were dark as plums. His wife and his concubine lived together under the same roof, and they did not quarrel. But the onmyoji was not a happy man. He lived in what was widely said to be the 17th finest house in Kyoto. Spirits and demons of the air, Oni and Tengu alike, were ordered by him, and would obey his orders. He could remember every detail of 2 of his previous lives. As a young man, he had traveled to China to study, and he had returned with his hair prematurely gray, but with an unequaled knowledge of portents and omens. He was respected by those who were his superiors, and feared by those who were his inferiors. But, with all of this, the onmyoji was not happy. And this was because the onmyoji was afraid. Ever since he could remember, since he was a tiny child, he had been afraid, and everything he learned, every scrap of power he obtained, he had gathered in the hope that it would drive away the fear, but the fear remained. It waited behind him, and in the heart of him. It was there when he slept, and there to greet him when he woke in the morning. It was there when he made love, and when he drank, and when he bathed. It was not a fear of death, for in his heart he suspected that death might be an escape from the fear. And there were days when he wondered if, by his arts, he were to kill every man, woman, and child in the world, that the fear would be gone. But he suspected that the fear would still haunt him, even if he were alone. It was fear that drove him, and fear that pushed him into the darkness. The master of yin-yang sought knowledge from the defilers of graves. He met with misshapen creatures in the twilight, and he danced their dances, and he partook of their feasts. On the outskirts of the city, where thieves and brigands and the unclean lived, the master of yin-yang kept a dilapidated house, and in that house there were 3 women, 1 old, 1 young, and 1 who was neither young nor old. The women sold herbs and remedies to women who found themselves in unfortunate situations. It was whispered that unwary travelers who stopped in that house for the night were often never seen again. Be that as it may, no man knew of the onmyoji's involvement with the 3 women, nor of his visits to the house on those nights when the moon was dark. In his head, and in his heart, the onmyoji was not an evil man. He was frightened, and the fear stole the joy from any moments of pride or happiness, and leached the pleasure from his life. One night, several weeks before the events previously related, when the moon was at its darkest, He had asked the three women in the dilapidated house the questions that troubled him most. The wind blew through the broken screens and howled in the rotting eaves. "How can I find peace?" he asked the oldest of the women. "There is peace in the grave," she told him, "and a momentary peace in the contemplation of a fine sunset." She was naked, and her breasts hung like empty bags upon her chest, and on her face she had painted the face of a demon. The Onmyoji scowled and tapped his fan into the palm of his hand impatiently. "Why do I have no peace?" he asked the youngest of the three women. "Because you are alive," she told him with her cold lips. The Onmyoji was most afraid of the youngest of the three women, for he suspected that she was not alive. She was beautiful, but it was a frozen beauty. If she touched him with her cold fingers, he shuddered. She was not naked, but her robe was open, and down her chest curved 2 rows of breasts, like the breasts of a she-pig or a rat, her many nipples black and hard as so many lumps of charcoal. She sucked the air in through her teeth and held it in, and then, after too long a time, she exhaled. And she said, "In the province of Mino, many, many long days of travel away from here, to the north and the east, on the side of such and such a mountain, is a small temple. It is of so little importance that it has but one monk tending to it. He is afraid of nothing, and he has the peace you desire. Now I can weave it so that when he dies, you will gain his strength, and you will fear nothing. But once I have woven, you will only have until the next full of the moon to cause his death, and he must die without violence and without pain, or the weaving will fail." The three women withdrew into another part of the tumble-down house, and when they returned again, it was almost dawn, and the sky was beginning to lighten. They handed the Onmyoji a square of woven silk, pale as moonlight. On it, painted the Onmyoji and the moon, and the young monk. The Onmyoji nodded, satisfied. He would have thanked them, but he knew that one must not thank creatures of their kind, so he placed their payment on the floor of their house and hurried home, to be there before daybreak. Now, there are many ways to kill at a distance, but most of them, even if they do not involve direct violence, involve the infliction of pain. The master of yin-yang consulted his scrolls. Then he sent his demons to the mountain where the monk lived to obtain for him things that the monk had touched. That was where the fox had overheard them. And here, and now, the Onmyoji sat in front of the little table, with the lamp upon it, and the lacquer box, and the key. One by one, he added a pinch of the substance in the little porcelain plates to the fire of the lamp, a pinch for each of the 5 elements, and the final pinch was from the last thing the demons had stolen from the monk. It was from the plate with nothing in it, which contained a scrap of the monk's shadow that the demons had stolen from him. With each pinch of the powder, the Onmyoji added to the flame. It burned higher and brighter, and when he added the final pinch of nothing, which was the monk's shadow, the flame burned so high it filled the Onmyoji's chamber with a light, and then it was gone, leaving the room in darkness. The Onmyoji kindled the light, and was pleased to observe that on the silk square that covered the table there was an unpleasant stain, as if something dead had been lying there over the face of the young monk. He observed this with satisfaction. Then he went to his bed and slept the night peacefully, and without fear. He was, for that night, content. In the monk's dream that night, he was standing in his father's house, before his father had lost his house and all he owned in his disgrace, for his father had powerful enemies. His father bowed to him, and the monk remembered in his dream that his father had died by his own hand, and he also remembered that he, the monk, was still alive. He tried to tell his father this, but his father indicated without words that he could not listen to anything his son could tell him. Then he produced from inside his robe a small lacquer box, and he held it out for his son to take. The monk took the enamel box, and his father was no longer there, but he gave no thought to this, for the enamel box took all his thoughts, although, in his dream, he thought he saw the flick of a fox's tail through an open door. He knew there was something important inside the box. There was something he needed to see, but the box resisted all his efforts to open it. When he woke, he felt troubled and discomfited, wondering if the dream was an omen or a warning. If it was an evil dream, said the monk, then may a Baku take it. Then he rose, and went out to bring in water, and begin his day. On the second night, the monk dreamed that his grandfather had come to him, although his grandfather had died, choking on a mochi, a small rice cake, when the monk was little more than a baby. His grandfather stared out to sea with blind eyes. The seabirds wailed and cawed over the howl of the sea wind and the splash of the spray. His grandfather opened one old hand to reveal a small black key. Slow as a mechanical toy, he put his hand forward. The monk took the key from his grandfather. A seagull screeched 3 sad descending notes, and the monk would have asked his grandfather what they signified, but the old man had gone. The monk held the key tightly. He looked about for something that the key would fit, but the island was barren and empty. The monk walked about the island slowly, seeing nothing. And then it came to the monk that he was being watched in his dream, and he looked around him, but there was nothing in his dream, save for the distant seagulls and a tiny figure on a distant cliff, which might, the monk thought, have been a fox. He woke with his hand closed about a non-existent key, still feeling that the eyes of a fox were upon him. The dream was so real that, later in the day, as a cold wind tumbled the first red and orange leaves from a maple tree into the temple's tiny vegetable garden, where the monk was tending the white and yellow gourds that grew in profusion, he found himself looking about him for the key, only slowly realizing that he had never touched or seen it in the waking world. That night, the monk expected another dark dream. As he closed his eyes, he heard something at his door, and then he slept. But for the first part of the night, he dreamed nothing at all. And in the second part of the night, he dreamed he was standing upon a bridge, watching carp swimming placidly about a fish pond. And one of the carp was purest silver, and the other carp was purest gold, and it made the monk happy to watch them. He woke, certain that the dream was a good omen, and relieved that the days of dark dreams were done with. And he smiled and was happy as he climbed from his sleeping mat. The monk's good mood remained until he stumbled over the body of the fox, her eyes closed, stretched out across the threshold of the temple. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. At first, the monk believed the fox was dead. Then, as he squatted beside her, he perceived that she was breathing, so shallowly and slowly that one could scarcely tell that she was breathing at all. But still, she was alive. The monk took the fox into the little temple and set her down beside the brazier to warm herself. Then the monk said a silent prayer to the Buddha for the life of the fox. For she was a wild thing, thought the monk, but she had a good heart, and I would not see her die. When I was a boy, said the monk to the unconscious fox, before my father's disgrace, I would, from time to time, run away from my nurse and my teachers, and I would go to the market where they sold live animals. In bamboo cages, I saw all manner of beasts. foxes and dogs and bears, small monkeys and pink-faced monkeys, hares and crocodiles, snakes and pigs and deer, herons and cranes and bear cubs. When I saw them, it made me happy, for I loved the animals, but it also made me sad, for it hurt me to see them imprisoned like that. One day, after the merchants had packed their wares and gone for the day, I found a broken cage, and in it, a baby monkey, too scrawny even to have been sold for the pot, for it was dead, or so somebody must have thought, but I perceived that it had lived, and so I concealed it in my breast and made my way to my father's house. I kept the monkey in my room, and I fed it scraps I saved for my own meals. He grew, my little monkey, until he seemed almost as big as I was. He was my friend. He would sit in the persimmon tree outside our house, waiting for me to return. My father tolerated the monkey, and all went well, until the day a certain lord came to the house to see my father. The monkey seemed to go mad. He refused to let the lord approach my father. Instead, he swung down and barred his way, baring his teeth, showing his chest, acting as if the lord were a rival from another tribe of monkeys. The lord gestured to one of his retainers, who pulled out his bow and put an arrow through the monkey's chest, although I begged him not to. I carried the monkey out of the house, and he looked into my eyes as he died. Later, when my father was disgraced, it was through the machinations of that selfsame lord. And sometimes, I think that the monkey was not a monkey, but a spirit sent by Amida Buddha to protect us. And protect us it would have done, if only we had listened and seen. This was long ago, little fox, before I was a monk, in a life that is dead to me. But still, we learn. And perhaps, with all your fox tricks, perhaps you also wish to protect me. And then the monk said a prayer to Amida Buddha, and another prayer to Kishibojin, who was a demon before she encountered the Buddha, and who guards children and women, and to Dainichi Nyorai. And lastly, he said a brief prayer to Binzuru Harada, who was the first of the Buddha's disciples, whom the Buddha had forbidden to enter nirvana. He said his prayers to all these entities, imploring their aid and their intercession for the little fox. And at the end of all his praying, the fox still lay limp and still on the matting, like a dead thing. There was a village at the foot of the mountain, almost a half-day's travel away. Perhaps, thought the monk, there will be a doctor or a wise woman in the village who can help the fox. And without a second thought, he picked up the limp fox and began to carry her down the mountain track that would eventually take him to the village. It was chilly, and the monk shivered in his thin robes. Large flies, the last and oldest and most unpleasant flies of the year, buzzed about him, following him down the track, doing their best to annoy him. Halfway down the mountain stream became a small river, and there was a bridge over this river. As the monk approached the bridge, he saw an old man coming up the track towards him. The old man had a long white beard and long eyebrows, and he leaned on a tall carved stick as he walked. There was an air about him of wisdom and serenity, but there was also an air of mischief, or so it seemed to the monk. The old man waited on the bridge for the monk to reach him. "The maple trees are very beautiful," said the old man. "So many colors, and so soon they will be gone. Sometimes I think that the autumn can be equally as beautiful as the spring." The monk agreed that this might be so. "Now, what is that you are carrying?" asked the old man. "It looks like a dead dog. Is that not an unclean thing for a monk to be carrying?" "It is a fox," said the monk, "and she is not dead." "And do you go to kill her?" asked the old man gruffly. "I go to seek a cure for her," said the monk. The old man looked very stern, and he raised the stick he carried, and with it he hit the monk, once across the side of the head, and once across the shoulders. "That is for deserting your temple," said the old man with the first blow of the stick, "and that is for meddling in the affairs of fox spirits." The monk bowed his head. "You may be right to hit me," he said, "for it is as you say. I am not in my temple, and I am carrying a fox. But still, I believe I am doing the right thing in trying to seek a cure for her." "The right thing? The right thing?" And once again the old man hit the monk with the stick, this time prodding him in the chest with it. "Why, you ninny, you thoughtless creature, the right thing to do would be to return to your temple with the fox, and to sleep, with a token of the king of all nights dreaming beneath your head, for it is in dreams that your little fox girl is trapped." "If I can ask this without receiving commensurate blow to my person," said the monk, hesitantly, "where would I find a token of the king of all nights dreaming?" The old man stared at the young monk, and then he looked at his carved stick, and then he sighed, long and loudly, like a very old man trying to cool hot soup. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out a strip of paper with something written upon it, and this paper he pressed into the monk's hand. "There," grumbled the old man, "but you are still a fool, for the fox will die, or you will. And there is not a thing you can do on this earth, or off it, that would change this, whether or not your motives are pure." The monk was going to protest, to ask why the old man had given him the token if it could do no good, when he realized that he was alone on the bridge, and indeed alone upon the mountainside. That old man must have been Benzuru Harada, thought the monk, for Benzuru Harada is often depicted as an old man with a white beard and long eyebrows, and he will do good on this earth until one day the Buddha permits him to move on. Still, the monk wondered why Benzuru Harada would have helped someone as insignificant as himself, and he took little comfort in recalling that it was for breaking his vow of chastity that Benzuru Harada was denied nirvana. The fox had weighed almost nothing on the journey down the mountainside, but as the monk turned to walk back up the mountain, he found the body seemed to get heavier and heavier. A soft mist had descended upon the mountainside, blurring the edges of things. The monk placed one foot in front of the other, and he walked back up the mountain. He wondered if he were doing the right thing helping the fox. He did not know, but he knew that he could not abandon her. He had to try. It was late in the afternoon by the time the monk reached the temple. He had left early in the morning. Autumn mist hung like cobwebs, or strands of raw silk, across the mountainside, and the encroaching twilight made the world feel doubly dreamlike. Even the temple, in which the monk had spent the last 8 years, seemed ghost-like as he entered it, as if it were somehow now an imaginary place. The brazier was almost cold. The monk added charcoal to it, and he cooked his rice over it, roasting some thinly sliced gourd to accompany it. Then he made his evening devotions, although he made them with slightly less enthusiasm than usual. It is one thing to pray. It is another thing to pray to entities who might not only be listening, but who will search you out on the road and beat you across the head with sticks if you say something that offends them. In the flickering light of the brazier, the monk experienced a strange illusion. It occurred to him that a scrap of his shadow was missing, gone, as if it had been torn away. The fox slept like a dead thing. The fox was so small, he ran his hands across the softness of her fur. Then he inspected the strip of parchment that Benzuru Harada had given him. He could not read what was written there. The characters seemed to twist and shimmer as he looked at them, like characters in a dream. The monk put the fox in his robe, so the heat of his body would keep her warm, and perhaps keep her alive. He lay down on his sleeping mat and placed the slip of paper beneath his pillow. And, worn out from his walk first down the mountain, then back up the mountain, he slept. End of chapter 4. And thus, dear listener, ends this part of our tale. But fret not, for there is more to come. Feel free to subscribe and hit the alerts icon so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time, farewell.